little self and your role, and what is the Data Nutrition Project?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. This is a great way to start my Wednesday. It's 9 a.m. here, but I'm excited to be here.
You're good.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm Matt. I am the technical lead for the Data Nutrition Project. A little bit about me. Uh, a little while ago, I used to be an AI engineer. This is probably 9 or 10 years ago. So the field has undergone, I don't know, 100 different revolutions, so to speak, since I was probably more full-time being an AI engineer. And yeah, and after being an AI engineer for a while, I shifted my focus more into education and literacy, where and started working at the MIT Media Lab. And it was while working at the MIT Media Lab that I met the co-founders of the Data Nutrition Project when we were doing a fellowship on the ethics and governance of artificial intelligence, all the way back in 2018. And it's wild to think that even in 2018, how different the sort of field of AI and algorithmic decision making was compared to what it is now and what it has been in the last year, especially. So while doing this fellowship, we were really thinking about what are some sort of projects that we could work on that would sort of in the longer term address issues of ethics and governance of AI. And the thing we decided to focus on was how much data impacts algorithmic decision making and AI models, especially. We've heard the sort of term garbage in, garbage out, and we also are thinking around bias in, bias out. An AI model is only going to be able to find patterns in the data that you give it to start and to train it. And so and knowing that we were very connected to people in the field of data science and the field of AI, who are trained, to do statistical decision making, statistical analysis, and coding AI algorithms, but maybe aren't always trained on the social context and the cultural context in which the data that they are giving to a model comes from, and they're not trained necessarily to know if the data that they are providing to a model is representative, if it's looking at the right metrics and the right features and these kinds of things, which is where we, started the Data Nutrition Project. This idea of having nutrition labels for data sets, and it's really fun to be able to think about us borrowing a metaphor from your field into the field of data science, and now getting to combine it back and thinking about nutrition and artificial intelligence combined as well. So over the years since 2018, we founded this nonprofit. We've done a lot of research with data scientists around what is the information that they want to know about a data set, what is the information that they maybe don't know and need to know about a data set, and how can you present that in an accessible way when introducing data scientists and project managers in AI and policymakers to data that's going to be used for algorithmic decision making. So we've been doing a lot of work in that field. We also are all kind of folks who do other work in the field of artificial intelligence and algorithmic decision making more broadly, in addition to our work in DNP. I myself do a lot of artificial intelligence literacy work, so training folks running professional development for people of all ages, especially sort of high school and in the workforce, around how AI works, how it impacts your life, and things of that nature. And so yeah, and I think that mainly brings us up to today. We now have a tool for building nutrition labels from data sets, and we're really excited about what's coming next.
So we've been talking about this for about 2 years already. When we started the conversation, and I remember finding you, and I can't remember what I did. I think I typed it into Google or something, because I knew there need to be something around a label, and can we do something around data sets? And then I came up with this data nutrition label, and then I was intrigued because I was like, oh, somebody's already doing this. And then when I read the details, like, yeah, this is exactly what I was looking for. But can you tell me a little bit more about your inspiration from the food side, the food label side? Because usually people, I guess, come to you and say, hey, do you do food labels?
That is true. It's been really interesting when we get folks reaching out to us. Some folks who are like, "Oh, are you like in the field of nutrition?" And then we're sort of like, "Ah, sorry, no, we're using the metaphor," and which is really awesome when you did reach out to us. And I was like, "Oh my God, it is also nutrition, but it's also the field of AI." It's great.
Yes.
So yeah, basically when we were starting the project back in 2018, we found that the nutrition label as a metaphor for what we were trying to accomplish with data sets and their usage and algorithmic decision making was really sort of potent. It was kind of like, from one perspective, the metaphor in terms of having a sort of representation of what is going into your body and then also into your data in a way that became a pervasive sort of part of policy was really compelling. The fact that nutrition labels eventually became sort of a part of everyday life for people. We also really liked the idea of trying to bring more transparency to what data is used that goes into algorithmic decision making. Just having a bit more sort of like awareness of what different ingredients, what different what types of representation, how that impacts the health of a data set and the health of an AI model. We really like those metaphors with thinking about how to sort of express to people what kind of data was in a large data set that they would then use for the purposes of algorithmic decision making. I think over time we have also sort of tried to really focus it on it as a metaphor and really think about what are the important things for people to know, and think about how also a nutrition label is really important, and especially when it comes to the field of nutrition, you also need to be able to read a nutrition label. It's not just that having that information there is enough. And so over time we've also been thinking about how our nutrition labels for data sets can also be an opportunity to educate people on what kind of data is quality and trustworthy when putting it into an algorithmic decision-making model.
Yeah. So in terms of your process thinking of what is important based on the current knowledge that you then have of the issues of AI data sets, how did you then come about with, okay, these are the most important things to think about when you're thinking about trustworthiness and transparency?
Great question. So I will say we kind of started with this idea of like, especially focusing on representation. One of the biggest issues around bias in AI came from some early work by, say, researchers like Joy Boyle and Winnie into facial recognition models, and how a lack of representation of different skin tones can really impact the quality of a model in sort of predicting facial recognition or person recognition, things of that nature. So noticing how representation impacts bias was kind of a big starting point for us. And so that is where so with that in mind, we kind of started with a much more sort of true to the kind of food-based nutrition label idea of having like, different types of identities and sort of like percent represented in the data set as compared to sort of baseline. However, in that work, we realized that there actually really isn't a way to, actually assess what baseline representation is. So for instance, if someone's using a model or using a data set that was created from just people in the United States, but they want to use that data set for a product they're going to put worldwide, what's baseline? What's baseline for skin tone representation in that? How do you even find that baseline, considering that while census collection in various countries is probably the most robust form of a baseline, it's not complete. And so over time, we really started to realize that this idea of comparing representation to a baseline is not going to be accurate, and it's not going to lead to, say, like numbers or percentages of representation that will be meaningful enough as part of what data scientists and AI engineers need to know. So as a consequence of that, and as a consequence of a lot of interviews we've had with data scientists over the years, where we have shifted our focus is to really knowing basically what is the intended use of a data set, since a lot of times data sets are used by people in ways that the original data set creator and owner didn't want them to. A good example of this is there's a a data set that's often used in natural language processing pre-generative AI for sort of creating like chatbots and things. And that data set is the Enron email data set. So if folks are familiar, once Enron was sued in the US, all of their emails were sort of like made public, and someone made a data set of all of them. And that has been used for a long time in natural language processing. But the person who created that data set had no intention of Enron emails being the basis for all chatbots that existed before, say, ChatGPT. And so that's when we started to shift our focus to, yeah, intended uses, uses that people aren't necessarily supposed to use something for. And then also really being transparent about the process of the creation of the data set. Because in sort of asking people, data set owners, when they're creating a label about, how did you like plan for your data definition? What is maybe some of the domain context that is really important for people to know? What are some of the ways in which historically, say, bias and harm has existed within your particular domain that might be perpetuated through the data set? And how did you think about that in the crafting and collection of your data? Asking these kinds of questions would be able to surface potential issues that a data set, that someone using a data set for AI models might need to know, but in a way that encourages them to think critically about the usage of data and not sort of make an absolute decision of like, yes, this is representative, and no, this is not, just because we discovered that that's not a yes or no question that we can actually answer.
Yeah. So you've done a lot of work already. I mean, if you started like 2018, but you've also done more than that. You've actually, published a white paper and published research. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so it started back in 2018 as part of the fellowship that we were doing. We published a white paper, which is kind of the first version of the dataset nutrition label. And after publishing that, we did a lot of feedback sessions and interviews with data scientists. And as we discovered that some of the original concepts that we had, and this is back to what I was saying before about sort of like the percentages and representation as the focus, wasn't the most useful information to them. And so we did another round of research interviews and design with that in mind, based on that feedback. And then we released, version 2 as its own white paper. When we got, a lot of positive feedback from version 2. However, as folks who are really focused on sort of design and iteration, we again went back and did more feedback until last year when we released version 3 of our nutrition label. And when I say versions 1, 2, and 3, it's not as if just the design is changing. The design is of the label to make it more accessible in terms of where information presented as part of it, but also what information is present is very different between versions 1, 2, and 3. With 3 being what we feel like is the most robust synthesis of the feedback we've gotten from data scientists in terms of what they want to see, and subject matter experts in various domains about what's important for a data scientist to know when looking at data within their field. And this has led to not only the creation of a couple of white papers, but also the creation of a tool to help the process of making a label for data sets easier. We see this as data set documentation. We aspire to have it be part of standards as for data set publishing and data set usage and algorithmic decision making. And so if that is something we aspire to, we also want to make sure that the process of making a label and detailing all this information is not terribly cumbersome.
Yeah. And that's a good point, actually, because I think my next question would be, so very good. What is the process? What process have you come up
with? So our process is really it's essentially it starts with a pretty big questionnaire. We have around 50-ish questions. that we ask dataset owners or dataset labelers, if they're not the owner of a dataset but want to make a nutrition label on it, to answer. And these questions kind of start with some of the basic information, like who's the owner of it, who maintains the dataset, where can you find it, how big is it? But then it moves more into like, what is the intended use? What is some of the domain knowledge that someone would need to know if they're going to use this data set in terms of what domain or content area it's in, and what would they need to know about that? To asking more about like what were the identities and communities represented in the defining of the data set qualities, as well as the collection process and things of that nature. So it's a pretty hefty questionnaire. It is meant to be more easy as a starting point than, say, always having to publish a white paper every time you release a data set. And it is meant to be a little bit more involved than, say, just getting some automated statistics about different columns within your data set and things of that nature. What we have found is that, the first time through, maybe filling out a questionnaire for a data set, it might take, something like, 3 hours or 4 hours to do. And then over time, it becomes a little bit easier. And maybe the next time you fill out a questionnaire for a data set, once you're familiar with the concepts involved, it takes more like 2.5 hours to do. But that's just the first step of the process. It's really important to us that the information provided by a dataset owner or labeler, like, we want to trust that their information that they're providing is correct and sort of like accurate to the best of their knowledge. And we also know that they're often only one person or one group of people in a particular area, and so it's important to just make sure that if there is other domain knowledge that other subject matter experts or other people who are directly impacted by the data that's being collected might know about, that the people who create the label might be unaware of, that information gets captured in the label as well. So then we have a review process. So once someone basically answers all the questions to the best of their knowledge, they can click submit for review. And then we have a team of subject matter experts in the field, so folks who have like interdisciplinary knowledge, so folks who are familiar with data, folks who are familiar with, say, the cultural and social context in which data is collected, come together to review the information, provide feedback if there's maybe something missing that the data owner could add to the label, and things of that nature, before eventually, hopefully, approving the questionnaire that someone filled out as accurate, representative, and robust. And once someone fills out the questionnaire, all those questions have a one-to-one relationship with our actual label. So once the questionnaire is filled out, you actually can see a version of your label pretty much immediately while you're working on it. And then after it's approved, you can see a public version of your label, meaning our watermark of like draft or in review is not there anymore. So that's the process.
And what do you see, kind of, what is your goal, that everybody will have like this particular label that has got a stamp, or what is your vision?
That is a really good question, and I think that for us, we're really excited to explore what that means, because one thing that we've been seeing in the year or so since we released version 3 of our label is that the fundamental structure is really useful, and what that structure means in different domains is really disparate. There are some areas where or some domains where AI is being applied that maybe, at least in the US, have regulation already in place for them, such as healthcare and financial technology. And then there are other domains where there is no regulation already in place, such as big tech, social media, and recommendation systems, and things like that. So when we think about what it means to apply the label in those domains, it's going to mean very different things. And so I think we're sort of starting to unpack that and unpack then what the strategy is for having good, transparent data documentation in those different domains. And I think that we think that what we have is really robust. We're not sort of purists in thinking that our way of doing documentation is the only way and that kind of thing. And so we definitely try to work with other people in this field of data documentation, and work with experts in individual domains like healthcare, financial technology, social media, maybe more like transportation, to make sure that
Nutrition.
nutrition, exactly, to make sure that it works well for that domain. And that is and so that can start to look like, having a label be a required part of a vending process for a government entity that's looking to vend AI technology. Or it could look like, a label being part of the say, like, at least in the US, like the FDA stamp of approval for a new healthcare or
Yeah.
nutrition-based product, things of that nature. But we're really sort of trying to think about how it can be more custom to those domains for what's best for them and most strategic
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah. Can you give us maybe an example of current kind of people who have used the labels?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or created them?
So we have used the labels in the academic sector in a couple of different areas. We have one researcher we worked with who created a data set to sort of capture, this is especially during the height of the pandemic, capture social bonding as a response to disasters. Sort of like, does the social strength of a community basically have more success in predicting the ability of a community to weather disaster compared to, say, economic security. And so we built a label as part of that research to show sort of like how social data was collected and sort of like how it was defined, how that might be useful and how it might not be useful, things of that nature. And so that is one domain. We've also created labels in the field of natural language processing alongside some Microsoft researchers. We recently created a label as part of a data set with Microsoft researchers that focuses on American Sign Language specifically. So Microsoft researchers worked to create a data set to capture sort of American Sign Language signs as part of like machine translation, because ASL is often left out, and sign languages are often left out of machine translation in that domain entirely. And oftentimes, if people are trying to do automatic machine translation for ASL, they might pull signs from, say, YouTube. However, many of, say, YouTube tutorials are done by folks who are not native to the ASL community. They might be folks who come from a hearing community and then learn to become interpreters. And so the Microsoft researchers wanted to capture their sort of like a data set that was really built from a community-oriented process of engaging folks who are native to ASL. So it's another example of a label we've made. We've also engaged in sort of the customization of the labeling process to different domains with a couple of partners. So we've worked with the United Nations Humanitarian Data Exchange portal to think about what are some of the ways we could take the sort of ideas of data provenance and data trustworthiness that are part of our label and bring them into their interface. So yeah, those are a couple of different projects we've worked on.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So I think, Roche, if you could put up the label, then maybe now that we've got the background and what was the inspiration and who's using it, is to maybe talk us through the different sections of what a label actually looks like. There you go. Can you see that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good.
Awesome. Yeah. So as you can see, kind of in this presentation, we have the label kind of broken out by different types of information that you might want to know. So at the very top, in that sort of top blue bar, you have some just background data on the label itself, like, for this particular data set, who is the person who made the label? What is the level of completion that they had for like the questions that are asked, because we don't require you to fill out all 50 questions, especially because sometimes they're not all relevant to your data set. But sometimes you can also try and submit one without filling out questions, and so it's helpful to know how much is filled out. And from there, we kind of go into the way the information hierarchy works. We have, kind of the left third and then the right 2/3. And the left third, that column where it says description and all the information below it, like about the data set, that's kind of all the basic information that data set users often want to know about the data, like How big is it? Who are the owners? What's a brief description of it? What are some tags, that you can put on the data set for, its area and domain. So all that's kind of in that left third column. And then when we go over to the right 2/3 columns, we have the top row, which is the how to use it, and then we have the inference risks below. So for the how to use it section, this is really getting back to the what I was naming earlier around use cases. So this is where someone has said, like, here are some ways that this data set is intended to be used. And then the data set owner or labeler can also sort of name what are some ways in which it really shouldn't be used, to make that really clear to folks who might use it. That, like, if you're trying to extrapolate, this data set collected within this one city to a product that's meant to be global, like, maybe reconsider first, things of that nature. And then finally, the lower area called inference risks is where we kind of highlight, some of the areas that someone who is using the data set might want to pay attention to as far as what are some possible ways in which usage of this data set could, say, perpetuate harms that that might be within the domain that it's used. So in what ways using the data set could be risky if it's not thought through in detail.
Yeah.
And so that area often includes questions like, is this about humans? Where was the data collected? Who was represented in the data collection process, things of that nature.
Yeah, very good. And it's so it's a very clean label. Like, it's very easy to read, and the colors are, it's easy to follow. And hopefully, like, the data behind it is easy to complete. Like you say, it takes about 3 hours, but the output is very clean and easy to read.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, thanks, Roche. One of the questions that we have, if you think about, like, the industry application, because of course for us nutrition is always kind of complex, and there might be different data sets. That's the one thing. But one of the areas that of course interests me is that, what has your experience been if you've been working in industry, is kind of how open are people to create a label, or to share their data to be able to create a label, and how important is it in your experience for companies to actually show transparency and trustworthiness, or even consider the ethical impact of their AI algorithms?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm going to start with the last part of that question, then I'll work my way forward. In terms of importance, it's really important in terms of that there have been a lot of documented cases of algorithms perpetuating and exacerbating, say, existing, patterns of harm in our societies that often don't get sort of like seen by the larger public until long after it's already caused harm to a lot of people. We've talked about bias in facial recognition systems and how that's been an issue, and how sort of computer vision and machine vision in general has had a lot of issues with regard to sort of harms being caused by sort of not being able to process everything within a picture. We see that in some of the work being done in self-driving cars so far as well, in addition to facial recognition systems and person recognition systems. And that sort of exists also in, say, social media recommendation systems and natural language processing. A lot of biased language, a lot of language that's part of one particular sort of cultural context and is not meeting people where they're at, or leading to translations that are either incorrect or sometimes perpetuating biases around sort of like gender roles in workplaces and things of that nature. And so, but usually it takes someone doing a lot of investigative journalism and a lot of sort of like work to uncover it, to show that issue after the fact, after it's already caused a lot of harm. And so the importance here is to really surface earlier on in the process possible harms. And when we mean earlier on in the process, we mean even before that AI model gets put out into the world, surfacing the ways in which data could be used in risky ways before like the model is even generated. We have found in industry that in conversations we've had with data scientists, they are often really horrified and saddened by harms caused by AI systems. and they have no desire to perpetuate biases like that. The issue is that they often feel unprepared and untrained when it comes to figuring out how to preemptively and proactively address those possible harms before they release a product. So we have found that, especially for within the folks who are implementing the models, that they have a lot of desire to really address that issue.
Yeah.
Where the rubber hits the road is that data collection, and especially responsible data collection, can be more expensive than the ease of just like, hey, I have a database of users. I'm just going to pull whatever passive data I've already collected on them, and create a data set for like an AI model based on that. What and a lot of what we have discovered is that sometimes when people go through the data set labeling process, they uncover, oh man, I wish I had done this part of the data set collection differently, or I'd have done this part of the data set definition differently. And so when they kind of do this, they're sort of after the fact being like, oh man, I wish I had done this differently, which is where we also have been trying to work with people to think about how do you adjust your data set collection process from the start, such that perhaps it is a bit more expensive, perhaps it takes a bit more time, but you're sort of building in robust practices that really make the, say, creation of a label easy, and also make you feel more confident in how you answer questions and what information you're sharing publicly about your data set. So that is where the rubber hits the road. It does cost more time and money, and people are often unwilling to spend more time and money on some of these more responsible practices, unless they see, say, the economic benefit further down the line, or unless they are a company with a particular mission-driven goal, which some are, and that's great. But there are also companies that do this work that are not mission-driven, and so then for them it's different. Yep.
So very interesting. And in terms of your experience, who is driving that conversation? Like, who is putting their hands up and say, actually, we need to think about this? Is it the data scientist? Is it the innovation manager? Is it the computer science? Like, who is it? Who is it?
That is a good question. Yeah, it can be different depending on the different domains. In say like more big tech, which in the U.S. is a lot less regulated than say healthcare and financial technology, you will see a lot of the like the data scientists like being like, hey, we want to raise this issue, and there have been some at least in the U.S. high profile firings because of that.
Right.
Yeah, but sometimes in other areas, like for instance, one thing that has been interesting for me is say in financial technology, sometimes folks who are at the level of like executives or at the board level who are very familiar with the regulatory processes in the US. And I apologize, all of my examples are going to be very US specific because that's just what I'm more familiar with. But like they understand the sort of like potential pitfalls of say releasing a tool that then through the regulatory frameworks around financial technology, it then determines that like it actually was sort of harmful based on those regulations, and then all the fines you have to pay afterwards is something they don't want to. And so sometimes at that higher leadership executive level, they might care more about having that in that domain. So it has been interesting as we've had more domain-based conversations to really see how each domain is different in terms of who's really prioritizing this.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
I also wanted to find out about, based on your kind of experience in terms of the how you help companies or organizations, because it's not just the label or the research that you do, you provide other services as well to help them, along thinking about it, and the literacy that you say as well, if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it's something we're really excited about is that because of some of this work we've done with helping make a nutrition label alongside data set owners, and uncovering in that process how much they've learned about say their own data set, but also their own data collection practices. We've really sort of been excited about the label making process as an educational process, and so thinking about how we can work with companies, with data set owners to do an intervention, one time around how can we sort of work with you on a data set definition and collection process from the beginning, and make sure that sort of with the label in mind, we're doing this process responsibly, such that it problem solves for having then a sustainable system of data set definition and collection in the future that makes, say, the creation of labels and the creation of responsible data sets easier. So, more this role of, say, consulting around data pipeline processes, so that you kind of set up companies for sustainable success in their data practices in the future, and using the label as like an educational tool to like fill out along the way with that process. That's something we're pretty excited about.
Yeah, great. I want to open this to the floor as well. I knew there was one question. So we have a question from Arnold, who says, how do you compare the data gathering in personalized nutrition with the healthcare sector? For example, standardized clinical data, patient-reported outcome data, to create data repository using the same semantic to increase the data quality for AI applications. That's a long sentence, Arnold.
Okay.
Did you get that?
I think so, yeah. And Arnold, please feel free to follow up if I don't get this. So again, I will also be using the U.S. as my baseline for understanding. But at least in the U.S., personalized nutrition-based data is not regulated in the same way as the healthcare sector data. And so, for instance, the creation of AI applications with clinical data and patient data has such a longer timeline for getting reviewed and approved, because it has to go through this incredible process with the FDA, compared with, say, personalized nutrition data, which in the US, a lot of companies like Fitbit and stuff are trying to sort of utilize from that particular, at least sort of, sensor monitoring perspective. And one thing I find is that, personalized nutrition data, at least if I'm using that particular type of metaphor, there's a lot of like passive data collection that is tending to be focused on from companies, say like Fitbit or like the Oura Ring or things of that nature. Whereas a lot of the standardized clinical data, it's very sort of proactive. It's with patient notes and with things of that nature. And so, I do see an opportunity in terms of like the combination of passive and active data collection, how it can be helpful and how they can sort of like complement each other. However, I know that in the US, at least, it's really hard to combine those two lanes, given the sort of heavy regulation in one and a lot less regulation in the other. Arnold, did that answer your question?
Well, can I speak or?
Yeah, you can speak.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe when you talk about clinical data and FDA, I think you're referring to clinical drug development. I do not think about this. I think it's just a patient going to the hospital, taking a blood sample, and then the sample somehow is analyzed, and you receive a table with values, markers, etc. And these tables are then some stored in the clinical information system. And the current landscape, based on legacy system, particularly in Europe, is very scattered. So every hospital has its own system. The way it stores data is really depending on the system, and it's very difficult to combine. That's the point currently, all these data, because there's different semantics. Now, there is a movement in Europe. It's openair.org, an organization, an initiative in Europe since already 20 years. Now, since 5 years, it gets grip to create a landscape in the healthcare system to get away from silo structures in this healthcare system, to provide data repositories independent of system providers with standardized rules to collect and store clinical data and also, patient outcome data, of course. That has nothing to do with drug development. With the idea that then, because you have a high data quality in clinical data, in these data repositories, which are not depending on a hospital anymore, they're somewhere in the clouds, to have much better data quality for any IA application as one of the areas of application. This is going on now. So we have there are certain key projects in big cities like London is turning into that. Big cities like Moscow is already there. The whole part of Spain, Catalonia, has now decided to go this way. So it's really a movement And that's why I make the reference to personalized nutrition. In the very end, and that would be probably the gold standard, you would combine clinical data, patient-reported outcome data with personalized nutrition data, which in a way is also some sort of clinical data. You take maybe a blood sample, you have there are many applications how you analyze body samples, and also you have questionnaires. As a dietitian, you know that. So, and then you can combine these things, and then, of course, the let's say the full scale of possibilities of personalized nutrition would then be possible to let's say to collect and to everybody could benefit from it. But that's a long road on the healthcare system still. Yeah. But personalized nutrition is at the beginning, and why not already starting to do it the right way before you end up in the same scattered landscape where the, let's say, the healthcare system, area is now, because of all these legacy systems and processes.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting. First of all, thank you for sharing. Since this is I feel like it's always helpful to talk to like people like you who are kind of experts in the domain, because I always learn something new, which is really helpful. Especially like learning more about what this looks like in Europe, because at least in the US, my experience has been that there has been a weird movement towards standardization of clinical data, but not like in an intentional sort of like, public way. It's just because everyone's now using Epic, basically across all the different sort of hospital systems. Like it's just people tend to use the same software, which is not the ideal way of moving towards a form of standardization as opposed to an intentional public process like what you're talking about. Oh, thank you for sharing that link. I will definitely take a look at that. But I think that it presents, like you're saying, some very interesting ways of having a more cohesive representation from a data perspective of personalization. Like it definitely, I imagine, to your point, and I don't know much about the science in this area as much as you all do, that having some of the personalized nutrition data alongside the clinical data can be a lot better at sort of like recognizing proactive care that people can take and things of that nature. I imagine that one of the things that's going to come up in the creation of these data sets is just making sure that when you combine a lot of information from different domains for one person, that it doesn't inadvertently cause personally identifiable information to be released about individuals that are part of these public data sets.
And like you also said, it needs to be the correct data, or considering the right data from the beginning and where you are getting that from. I think that is, a key point to take away from this is if you're going to train the data, then first consider what you have and what you should be having, and consult the domain experts as well if you are going to use that in a way that is going to have any kind of health outcome, whether that's lifestyle wellness or clinical, which is always going to be more regulated and more complicated. Thanks so much, Matt, for answering that. Are there any other questions? Because Matt has to dash off to another meeting. So unless there are no other questions, thank you so much for your time, Matt. I just wanted to ask you, how can people get hold of you and ask you questions, or send you an email if they have any further questions?
Absolutely. I'm going to type my my personal email for DNP in the chat, matt@datanutrition.org. You can also, we do have a contact if you kind of leave this meeting and lose this and you're like, oh wait, how do I get in touch? If you just go to datanutrition.org, you can find more information there, and we have a contact email which just goes to me anyway, so you can just reach out that way as well. Yeah, no, I'd love to. It's been very awesome to get to work with you, Maria, and sort of like learn more about the field of personalized nutrition and AI. And so I would love to chat with more of you about that. So please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much. And so for everybody, we are, as part of the Cleanup platform, we are really on a mission to really lead in this area and make sure that all these products that do come out are ethical, are trustworthy, do not increase inequality. And we want to really do that from a expert-driven, science-driven position. And with working with people such as Matt and organizations. So to us, it's really important. But of course, we do want a lot of stakeholders in the industry involved and also provide their input. For us, it would be our dream to have every company who is listed on the KeyNap platform also to have a data label so that we know where's this data coming from and is it relevant to anybody else in any other corner of the world. So that's really, really important to us. So with that, if you, as I said at the beginning, if you missed the white paper where we cover a lot on the topic of the ethics of AI, especially as we look in nutrition, but also behavior change and how we don't want everybody to have the exact same behaviors when it comes to nutrition and lifestyle if we are using the same kind of training set. So do have a read of that. It's only 50 pages long, so you just need about 20 minutes to read it. And do ask us any questions, send us any feedback. It will be a document that will be continuously evolving. And if you want to have a chat with me, then also book a call. So with that, you can always listen to the recording afterwards as well. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you everybody for attending, and we hope to see you on the next fireside chat. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll send you an email. And have a good rest of the day. Bye. Bye. Okay. Thank you. We didn't have any more alts.